A very good morning, I am Handayani, and as today's moderator, we are going to dive deep into sexual violence, fighting the norm to #Make School a Safer Place. It is a hot topic that has been going around for the past weeks, where a female student has voiced against her teacher who made rape jokes. However, there were a few unpleasant voices that said she should take that as a joke and stop making a mountain of a molehill. She has received numerous backlashes and threats from her male classmates, including rape threats. Before we get started, let me briefly state what makes an action a sexual violence. It is the lack of consent. To put it in simpler words, consent is the presence of a yes and not the absence of a no. Consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Today, we have some wonderful panelists with us here who are well versed in the subject we are discussing. First panelist, Ms. Sarah, a police officer from the Special Victims Unit. Next, we have an advocate from the Women's Aid Organization, Ms. Vatsala. Our third panelist, Ms. Diana, a clinical psychologist, followed by Ms. Rina, a lecturer on women's studies. And lastly, we have Mr. Afif, a senior counsel of Malaysian Bar. Without further ado, let's get into the forum. To kickstart the discussion, I would like to ask Ms. Rina to explain what is sexual violence, especially in a school setting.
Thank you for the question. So, sexual violence can be divided into two distinct areas, which is sexual harassment and sexual assault. Sexual harassment is a type of harassment involving the use of explicit or implicit sexual overtones, including the unwelcome and inappropriate promise of rewards in exchange for sexual favors, and it includes a range of actions from verbal transgressions to sexual abuse or assault. What can you consider a sexual assault? Sexual assault includes unwelcome sexual moves, requests for sexual favors, and other physical harassment of a sexual nature in a learning environment. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, it refers to sexual contact or behavior, often physical, that occurs without the consent of the victim. Rape, forcible sodomy, forcible object penetration, unwanted sexual touching, sexual contact with minors, whether consensual or forced, and any unwanted or coerced sexual contact are considered sexual assault. In a school setting, sexual violence occurs more commonly than we realize. These acts of violence are often done by their peers, teachers, or staffs. Most of the students in school are under the age of 18. Therefore, sexual violence, whether it is harassment or assault, will fall under child sexual abuse. Any sexual act with a child by an adult or someone older than the child is considered child sexual abuse. It entails coercing, deceiving, bribing, threatening, or bullying a child into performing sexual actions. Sexual touching, exposing the child to pornography, and taking obscene picture of the child are examples of physical, verbal, and most importantly, emotional sexual violence. Therefore, any of these acts in a school settings can be considered as child sexual abuse.
Thank you for the great explanation, Ms. Rina. Our next question will be to Ms. Sarah. Generally, when we talk about sexual violence in school, our conversations mostly focus on female victims. But how about male victims? How many male students have reported this crime?
Thank you, Ms. Moderator, for the great question. Yes, male students do experience sexual violence. In a school setting, we often think male students are assaulted by teachers. That's true.
But in one study by Gareth Maiden and Finkel Hall in 2019, of 13,000 male students aged 17 and under, 3/4 of them who reported being sexually assaulted said the person who assaulted them was another student. In a little over half of those assaults, the offender was a female student. Sadly, most of the victims had never told anyone about it. More often than not, though, it is purely sexist. Such contemptuous remarks about how these male students should feel lucky to be assaulted by female students or female teachers, and they must have enjoyed it. This downplays the victim's traumatic experience and makes it even harder for them to voice out. In short, we can't solve the problem of sexual violence in school without also addressing the sexual violence against male students. Even though our society doesn't accept it, male victims are still astonishingly common in sexual violence cases. According to Brown in 2021, male students who survive sexual violence can experience serious psychological and emotional effects, including PTSD, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and sexual dysfunction.
Yeah, we rarely hear about any of these on the news. We hardly ever discuss it. Stories of sexual violence are everywhere, but these stories of male students remain mostly hidden and unacknowledged.
Thank you for the great explanation. I hope the media and society in general pay more attention to these unheard voices. Next, I would like to direct this question to Ms. Vatsala. Victim blaming is a common occurrence concerning these cases, especially if the victim is a student. What is your take on this?
At first glance, you might question why anyone would blame the victim. But think about it. You may discover that there have been times when you too have blamed the victim rather than the perpetrator. Sadly, it is a common phenomenon. So, what constitutes victim blaming in a school setting? Some of the common things you hear are: you had to know what was going to happen, you must have sent mixed messages, what were you wearing, how hard did you try to stop it, why didn't you come forward sooner? A 2019 study shows that participants who chose the predator's side versus the victim's side reported greater victim blame, and this proves generally empathy for the predator is more than for the victim. So, why does this happen? Victim blaming occurs anytime someone implies that a crime was the victim's fault. A psychological experiment from 1966 concluded that victim blaming serves as a form of self-protection. They feel safer if they can imagine that the victim did something wrong, so they feel protected from being victimized. Victim blaming is dangerous. We contribute to the problem when we normalize victim blaming. It makes it harder for a survivor to come forward. As people are more inclined to look for faults in the survivor, the perpetrator has much upper hand when it comes to sexual violence cases, especially in a setting like a school, where the survivor is in a weaker power dynamic like a student. Victim blaming also allows perpetrators to avoid being held accountable for their actions. Furthermore, victims suffer the consequences as they might be isolated in school or suffer from mental health issues due to facing their predators every day. Overall, victim blaming is a horrible way to put a spin on an ugly tale to make it look bearable.
That is a solid explanation on victim blaming. We should all always keep in mind that it is always the predator's fault and not the victim's. Next, sex education, a taboo yet important topic to talk about. Ms. Dana, as a psychologist, what is your opinion on sex education in school? Is it relevant or are we pushing the boundaries?
Thank you for the questions. Students actually have the right to lead healthy lives, and society has its responsibility to provide them with comprehensive sex education that gives them the tools they need to make sure a healthy decision is made and to respect each other's right to bodily autonomy. Thus, good sex education teaches students what constitutes sexual violence, that sexual violence is wrong, and how to find help if they have been assaulted.
However, Malaysians find the word sex a taboo and therefore should not be taught to students. We need to have the fundamental understanding that actually sex education is not only teaching them about sex, but about their reproductive systems and most importantly, consent. Early exposure to sex education also prevents students from becoming victims of sexual violence if they have the basic knowledge of what's a good touch and a bad touch. Therefore, sex education needs to be implemented as early as 5 years old. Both parents at home and teachers at school also play important roles in delivering the sex education needed by their children. The Education Ministry also introduced reproductive and social health education, or called as PEERS, PEERS, in secondary schools in 1989, and it was extended to primary and preschools. The term sex education here was not only used because it was deemed taboo for the society, and that the subjects were taught verbally. The content of the PEERS curriculum is more towards the science of male and female reproductive system, fertility, and childbirth. Thus, following the increase in sexual violence cases, the PEERS is now being upgraded, and the upgrade will only include equipping students with the knowledge so that they would be aware of sexual harassment and assault and what action they need to take. To sum it up, sex education is important to be taught in school because awareness is the key to combat sexual violence.
Thank you, Ms. Diana. Last but not least, I would like to direct the next question to Mr. Afif. What can a victim do if they were sexually assaulted or harassed?
Thank you, moderator. A crucial step for the legal firm is to help the victim to file a police report because there are undoubtedly a huge number of cases that are not reported. The latest survey by YouGov Omnibus found that those who have faced sexual harassment, only 53% reported or told someone of the incident. The survey found that the main reasons sexual harassment went unreported were due to embarrassment, feeling that no one would do anything about the problem, and the fear of repercussion. When you are filing a police report as a victim, make sure that you write down the details of the assault, such as what happened, when it happened with date and estimated time, where it happened, and who was involved in the assault. And remember to get a copy of the police report. Next step, the investigation officer will open an investigation based on the police report you have made, and he or she may interview witnesses, suspects, and may also ask you to give a further statement at the police report. The case will be brought to the Deputy Public Prosecutor depending on the evidence, where he or she will determine whether there is a case to charge against the perpetrator. In the case of insufficient evidence, the case will be closed and classified as no further action, and there will be no charge. If there is sufficient evidence, the suspect will be charged and the charge will be read in the court. The case will proceed to sentence if the suspect pleads guilty. However, if the suspect pleads not guilty, a full trial begins. Regardless of whether the victim files a formal complaint or request action, the school must take reasonable steps to promptly conduct a thorough investigation and take corrective action. Parents too need to take initiative to help their children because they are usually the first to know if their child has been victimized. These are some of the most effective ways that can be taken to prevent more cases in the future.
Thank you very much for the information, Mr. Afif. My gosh, time is flying so fast. I will be closing this brilliant panel discussion with a few words. Our topic for today is such a controversial and serious matter. As conclusion, sexual violence in school has a profound impact on the physical and mental health of the victimized students. As well as causing physical injury, it can cause a range of sexual and reproductive health problems with both immediate and long-term consequences. Sexual violence is a serious crime and there should be no place in school for it. That is all for today. Signing off, I am Handayani. Thank you to all the brilliant panelists and see you next time.